It was a busy night at an upscale restaurant downtown. Amidst laughter and glasses of wine, a man in an expensive suit entered as if he carried the world on his shoulders and wanted everyone to know it. He sat down, snapped his fingers, and ordered, "Waiter, come here now." The young man ran, nervous, trying to keep his smile. But all it took was a small mistake in the order for the customer to raise his voice and humiliate the employee in front of everyone. "Do you know who you're talking to? I can make you lose your job right now." The hall fell silent. But what he didn't know is that the real boss was there, sitting discreetly at a nearby table, listening to every word. Stay until the end, because what started as a threat ended as a lesson no one in the restaurant would ever forget. Leave a like, subscribe, and activate the bell, because here in the Dark Karma stories, power changes sides, and truth always finds its place. The clock read 8:30 p.m. when the Dom Afonso restaurant, one of the most prestigious in the city, was beginning to reach its peak of activity. The ambiance was elegant, well-set tables, spotless white tablecloths, golden lights reflecting off the glasses, and the soft sound of a piano filling the air. The place exuded luxury and discretion, the kind of retreat where the wealthy felt comfortable flaunting their power in silence. At the glass door, an imported car parked. From inside, a man in a gray suit and a shiny watch came down. His name was Marcelo Fontes, a businessman known for his arrogance and impulsiveness, a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be feared, but did so anyway, just to remind others who was boss. He entered with slow steps and a look of superiority. He greeted the receptionist coldly, as if granting a favor. "Good evening, Mr. Fontes. Table reserved for 8, correct?" the waiter said with a professional smile. "I hope it's worth what I pay," Marcelo replied, walking past him without even looking him in the eye. He was led to a table near the window, the most popular spot in the house. The waiter in charge of the section was Rafael, a 24-year-old boy, dedicated, polite, and new to the restaurant. He had only been working there for 3 weeks, trying to help his sick mother and pay for his technical course at night. Rafael approached with the menu in his hands and nervousness on his face. "Good evening, sir. It's a pleasure to serve you today. Would you like to start with a drink?" he asked politely. Marcelo observed him for a few seconds, as if evaluating an object, and responded with contempt. "Bring a French wine, the best in the house, and make it quick, because I don't have time to waste." Rafael nodded, took the order, and walked away. But before he could reach the counter, he heard Marcelo's voice echo through the room. "Waiter!" he shouted impatiently. "Is this luxury service?" Everyone looked. Rafael returned, confused. "Did something happen, sir?" "I've been waiting for a glass of water." "For 3 minutes," the man said, loud enough to be heard throughout the room. "Does a customer have to beg to be treated well here?" The mood changed instantly. The murmur of conversations ceased. Curious and uncomfortable looks began to multiply. Rafael tried to remain calm. "Excuse me, sir. I was going to bring it as soon as I delivered the order to the kitchen." "Excuse me?" Marcelo repeated sarcastically. "Is that the answer you give to a client who pays your salary?" At the next table, a woman whispered to her husband. "He always does that. I've seen this scene before." "That's right," the man replied, lowering his voice. "He loves to show off his power." Marcelo noticed the looks and seemed to feed off them. He smiled and rested his elbow on the table. "You know what, kid? People like you only have jobs because people like me come here to spend money." Rafael swallowed hard, trying to contain his embarrassment. "I'm just doing my job, sir." But Marcelo didn't stop. "Then do it." "Right, and if you can't handle it, I can fix it with a phone call. I have acquaintances here. One request from me, and you're out tomorrow." The hall fell into absolute silence. The sound of the piano stopped, as if even the musician had stopped to listen. Rafael felt his face burn. He held the tray tightly, trying not to shake. But inside, what hurt wasn't fear. It was humiliation. At the counter, their restaurant manager, Pedro, watched the scene with a tense expression. I knew who Marcelo was. And I also knew that the owner of the restaurant, Augusto Nogueira, rarely appeared in the hall. But that night, Fate decided to play with chance. At the back table, discreetly dressed and watching everything carefully, Augustus, the real owner, watched the scene unnoticed. He had gone to dinner alone, as he sometimes did, to observe the service without announcing his presence. But now, his calm gaze became increasingly firm. He saw more than just an arrogant customer, via the kind of man who believed he could buy respect and felt his blood boil silently. Meanwhile, Rafael, trying to maintain his dignity, simply replied, "I understand, sir. I'll bring your drink right away." Marcelo smiled, satisfied. "That's how you say it. Learn quickly." The waiter walked away, and Augusto placed his glass on the table. The faint sound of crystal hitting marble echoed like a prelude. That night's dinner was just beginning, but the flavor would be quite different from what Marcelo expected. Rafael took a deep breath as he walked across the hall to the counter. Each step seemed heavier than the last. The sound of cutlery, once soft, now sounded like a chorus of judgment. He tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but Marcelo's voice still echoed in his head like an open wound. The manager, Pedro, approached discreetly. "What happened there, Rafael?" he asked in a low voice. "Just an unhappy customer. Nothing I can't fix," he replied, forcing a smile. Pedro watched him for a few seconds and nodded. "Okay, but if he overdoes it, call me. This man has crossed the line before." Rafael picked up the bottle of wine and returned to the table. His hands were still shaking, but he tried hard to hide it. When he arrived, Marcelo lifted his chin and observed him as if inspecting a subordinate. "Finally," he said with a mocking smile, "I thought I'd need to call someone more competent." Rafael remained calm. "Here's the wine you ordered, one of the best in the house. I hope you know how to serve at least that." The waiter began the ritual, tilting the bottle carefully. But before he could fill the glass, Marcelo interrupted. "Stop," he said suddenly. "You didn't clean the rim of the glass. Do you want to serve me wine with watermarks?" Rafael froze. He looked at the glass, wiped it with the napkin, and continued serving, feeling sweat running down the back of his neck. But Marcelo was not satisfied. "Do you know what your problem is, kid?" he asked, without waiting for an answer. "You weren't born for this kind of environment. I can tell from afar. Your posture, your way of walking. You're one of those people who thinks politeness means obedience." The waiter remained silent. "I just want to provide good service, sir," he said, trying to close the subject. "And you will," Marcelo replied. "Because if you don't do it right, I'll call the owner of this restaurant and ask him to fire you." The sentence cut through the air like a snap. Some customers stopped talking. Others just looked at each other, uncomfortable. It was like watching a cruel play that no one wanted to applaud. Rafael lowered his eyes. Inside, something burned. It wasn't anger, it was sadness. He worked hard, arrived before everyone else, worked overtime, and yet, all it took was for a man in a suit to raise his voice for him to feel small again. Marcelo took a sip of wine and made a disdainful face. "It's not bad, but I expected more. This place is going downhill." He looked around as if seeking applause for his own arrogance. "Pedro," he shouted, "get the manager here now." The manager, already expecting the worst, approached with a neutral expression. "Good evening, Mr. Marcelo. Is there a problem with the service?" "Problem?" he laughed. "I'd say there's a disaster. This employee of yours is completely incompetent." Pedro took a deep breath. "I'm sorry if there was any inconvenience, sir. May I ask what happened?" "What happened is that you hire anyone," Marcelo shouted, "and you still make me pay dearly for it." The whole room listened. Rafael remained standing, motionless, with tears in his eyes, trying not to collapse. Pedro tried to contain the situation, but Marcelo increased his tone. "I demand that he be fired now, right here, in front of me." A deathly silence fell over the restaurant. Everyone looked, but no one dared to speak. Pedro hesitated. "Mr. Marcelo, I cannot make this decision without authorization from the board." "Then call whoever the owner is." "I want to see if he approves of this type of employee." The arrogant voice echoed off the walls. and at the back of the hall, someone calmly stood up. Augustus, the real owner, straightened his jacket, discreetly cleaned his glasses, and began walking towards the table. Each step seemed to slow down time. The customers turned their faces away, sensing the growing tension. The sound of his shoes on the wooden floor sounded like the prelude to an inevitable turn. Marcelo was still gesticulating, complaining, until a shadow fell over the table. He looked up and saw a man with a firm posture, a serene look, but with something different in his eyes, silent authority. "Good evening, sir. Is there a problem?" Augusto asked politely. Marcelo, without recognizing him, replied, "Finally, I hope you're the general manager because the incompetence here has gone beyond all limits." Augusto kept his gaze. "I'm more than that," he said calmly. "I'm the owner of the restaurant." The silence was immediate. Marcelo blinked in surprise. The discreet laughter stopped. Even the sound of the piano stopped again. And then, for the first time that night, the power has changed sides. The silence that took over the Dom Afonso restaurant was almost palpable. All eyes turned to the man with the firm posture and calm speech who had just revealed who was really in charge there. Augusto Nogueira, the owner of the restaurant, was not just a businessman. He was a respected figure in the city for his discretion and principles. And now, he was faced with one of the most arrogant customers the place had ever had. Marcelo blinked a few times, trying to process what he had heard. "Oh, owner?" he stammered, straightening his jacket. Well, great. Finally, someone who can fix this." Augusto did not respond immediately. He just watched him for a few seconds, long enough for the man to start to feel uncomfortable with his own reflection in that calm, yet unwavering gaze. "Solve what exactly, sir?" Augusto asked, his tone neutral. Marcelo crossed his arms, trying to regain his composure. That employee of yours," he said, pointing at Rafael. "Poorly trained, insolent, incapable of dealing with a high-level client." Augusto kept his gaze silent. "I see," he replied slowly. "And what exactly did he do wrong?" Marcelo seemed to hesitate for a moment. He looked around as if seeking support, but only found cold, uncomfortable gazes. Still, he maintained a tone of superiority. "He took a long time to answer, made mistakes, and above all, responded to me disrespectfully." Augusto nodded, as if listening to a child tell a half-truth. Then he looked at Rafael. "Is that true, Rafael?" The waiter, still tense, took a deep breath. "Sir, I tried my best to answer. I admit I took a while with the wine, but at no point did I raise my voice or show any disrespect." Augusto observed him for a moment. "And you threatened to fire him?" he asked, turning to Marcelo. The customer smiled. Ironically. "Well, of course. I'm a customer. I pay a lot to be here. I have the right to demand the best, don't I?" It was at that moment that the room seemed to hold its breath. Augusto took a step closer. "You have the right to be treated well, Mr. Fontes," he said calmly. "But you don't have the right to treat anyone like trash." Marcelo stepped back slightly. "I didn't treat him like trash. I just demanded competence." "No," Augusto replied, his voice a little firmer. "You humiliated him." He paused, his gaze fixed. "And there is a huge difference between demanding and cruelty." The silence spread again. Some customers lowered their gaze, others watched attentively. Rafael, motionless, could hardly believe what he heard. It was the first time someone had defended him like that, and he was the one who least expected it. Marcelo tried to hide his discomfort with a forced laugh. "Look, we don't need to make a drama out of this. I just want to make sure people like him understand the kind of standards this restaurant must maintain." Augusto crossed his arms. "Funny, people like him?" Marcelo hesitated. "I mean, employees who are still learning. Employees who, even when humiliated, continue to work politely," Augusto added. "Because if that's the kind of person you're criticizing, they're exactly the kind of person I value most here." Marcelo felt the weight of those words. The owner continued. "You think money buys respect, but it only buys silence. And I don't run a restaurant of silence, Mr. Fontes. I run a place where dignity comes before luxury." Augusto's tone was calm, but each word carried the force of a sentence. Marcelo looked away, trying to maintain his composure, but his face betrayed his shame. "You know what's funny, Mr. Fontes?" Augusto said, bowing slightly. "You came in here thinking you could threaten an employee, but you forgot one simple thing." He paused dramatically. "True power is not in those who can command. It is in those who choose not to humiliate." The entire hall fell into absolute silence. The distant sound of rain starting to fall outside could be heard. Every person present knew they had just witnessed something rare. Someone with power using it to protect, not destroy. Rafael lowered his eyes, moved. Pedro, the manager, watched the scene with discreet pride, and Marcelo just stood there, motionless, with a lost look in his eyes, as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Augusto concluded calmly, "You will always be welcome in my restaurant as long as you come as a customer, not as a tyrant." He gave a slight wave and walked away. "Your dinner will be courtesy of the house, and I recommend you enjoy it." In silence. The last sentence sounded like an elegant but definitive full stop. And as Augustus left, the entire hall broke into spontaneous applause. Quiet, respectful, but full of meaning. Marcelo stood there without reacting, while Rafael, with tears in his eyes, simply thanked him in silence. That night, the real boss not only heard everything, he taught what it means have real power. The sound of applause was still echoing when Augustus walked away from the table. It wasn't loud applause, but restrained, respectful, the kind of gesture that arises when justice is served in front of everyone. They were applause that said much more than any words. The fear had been broken. Marcelo, on the other hand, felt the world collapsing in slow motion. What was once a stage for vanity now became a showcase for shame. He looked around and saw the faces of the customers. Some gave him disapproving looks. Others looked away, as if avoiding an uncomfortable mirror. Even the waiters, who had been cautious before, now walked with firmer steps, breathing a little relief in the heavy air. Marcelo tried to hide his embarrassment. He picked up the wine glass, but his hands were shaking. He took a quick, tasteless sip. It was the same expensive wine he had arrogantly chosen minutes before, but now it tasted of iron and regret. Rafael, still standing near the table, didn't know what to do. His breathing was rapid, his heart pounding too hard. The man who had just defended him wasn't just the restaurant owner. He was someone who had given him back something he hadn't even realized he'd lost. Dignity. Pedro, the manager, approached slowly and placed his hand on the waiter's shoulder. "Go inside, Rafael. Have a glass of water. You did everything right." Rafael nodded, his eyes welling up. But before leaving, he glanced at Marcelo, who was now staring at the empty plate in front of him, as if looking for a hole to disappear into. The hall, little by little, began to breathe again. The conversations resumed, but in a different tone, softer, more human. The sound of the cutlery hitting the plates again sounded almost like a sign of collective relief. At the table in the back, a couple commented in a low voice. Finally, someone had the courage to put this man in his place. "And in a way he will never forget," replied the other. The words echoed to Marcelo's ears, who clenched his fists, trying to control his shame. He looked around and realized that no matter how expensive his watch was, no accessory could buy respect. Every look that met his eye was a silent reminder of his own arrogance. He tried to call the waiter, but his voice failed. The throat was dry. For a moment he thought about getting up and leaving, but something inside him stopped him. It was pride trying to survive the shipwreck. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Rafael leaned his back against the cold wall and took a deep breath. The whole body was shaking, not of fear, but of relief. He looked at the reflection in the steel door and saw, for the first time in a long time, a gaze that didn't seem weak. Outside, the voices returned to normal, but inside him something had changed. Pedro entered and approached. "Are you okay?" Rafael nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm fine, yes. No need to be embarrassed, boy. Everyone saw what happened. I just didn't expect the owner to defend me like that, Rafael said, still in disbelief. Pedro smiled. Mr. Augusto has this habit. He likes to show up when we least expect him. But that's precisely why everyone respects him. He knows how to see people beyond their uniforms. Rafael looked at the floor, moved. He saw a waiter being humiliated, and he treated me like a person. That's never happened to me. Back in the hall, Marcelo remained, motionless. The waiter who replaced him brought the main course, but he didn't touch the food. The stomach was closed. The luxurious dinner now felt like a silent punishment. Augusto, sitting back at his desk, watched from a distance, without satisfaction, just reflection. He wasn't proud of having exposed anyone, but he knew that sometimes shame is the only medicine that cures the ego. A few minutes later, Marcelo slowly got up. He looked towards Augusto's table and hesitated. He wanted to go to him, but his pride still held him by the tie. He paid the bill, even though the dinner was complimentary, and left without saying a word. Outside, the light rain washed the sidewalk, and perhaps somehow it also began to wash the conscience of those leaving there. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere returned to its normal rhythm, but nothing was the same. The employees exchanged knowing glances, the customers spoke more quietly, and Rafael, now back at work, had a different sparkle in his eyes. That night no one talked about the menu, neither about the wine nor about the prices. The subject was different. It was about respect, courage, and the sound of justice spoken in a low voice. The next morning dawned silently, as if the day itself hesitated to awaken after the previous night. The Dom Afonso restaurant was still closed, but Rafael, he was already walking around the tables, replacing cutlery, aligning glasses, cleaning every corner with almost symbolic care. It wasn't just part of the job. It was a way of organizing what was messy inside him. The scene from the previous night came back in flashes to my mind. The arrogant face of Marcelo, the humiliation in front of everyone, the weight of silence, and finally, the firm and calm voice of Mr. Augusto. That phrase echoed endlessly. True power is not in those who can command. It is in those who choose not to humiliate. Rafael stopped for a moment and looked at his own reflection in the window. He saw dark circles, fatigue, but also something new. A gleam of dignity that he hadn't recognized in himself for a long time. Pedro, the manager, appeared through the kitchen door with a slight smile. "You're early, huh?" "I wanted to get everything in order before lunch," Rafael replied. Pedro observed the boy for a moment. "It's different today, lighter. I think it's because, for the first time, I felt that my work had value," Rafael said, without taking his eyes off the cloth he was wiping on the table. As the two talked, the news from the previous night began to spread. Some customers who witnessed the scene had commented on social media. A video of a short clip, recorded discreetly by someone at the restaurant, was circulating with captions like, "The restaurant owner gave an arrogant customer a lesson in respect. That is true leadership." Within hours, the episode became the talk of the town. But Rafael didn't know that yet. He preferred the silence of the morning, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the distant sound of silverware being arranged. For him, what really mattered was the feeling of being seen, not as a waiter. Hauperson. Later, Augustus appeared in the hall. He wore simple clothes without his usual jacket. He approached slowly and watched Rafael cleaning the glasses. "Good morning, Rafael." "Good morning, Mr. Augusto." The boss smiled. "Did you sleep well after yesterday?" Rafael laughed awkwardly. "I tried, but I confess I'm still processing everything." Augustus nodded. "Shame is never easy to digest, even when it's not ours." There was a brief silence. Then the owner continued, "I want you to know that you acted correctly. You maintained respect even when you were disrespected. That's not weakness, it's strength." Rafael looked him in the eyes, and for the first time he felt like he was talking to someone who understood. "I didn't know what to do, sir. I just tried not to make things worse." "And he did exactly what he had to do," said Augusto. "Sometimes the silence of the one being humiliated speaks louder than the scream of the one doing the humiliation." Rafael smiled slightly. "Thank you, really." No need to thank me, Augusto replied. I just said what everyone there needed to hear. The conversation was interrupted by Pedro, who appeared carrying a newspaper in his hands. Mr. Augusto, did you see that? He handed over the copy, and there it was. Restaurant owner defends employee humiliated by rich customer. Below the title, a photo of Augusto standing, looking firmly at Marcelo. Rafael was paralyzed. I can't believe that was in the newspaper. Yes, it did, Pedro replied. And there are people commenting on social media, too. Augustus sighed. What a strange world, huh? We do what's right, and it becomes news. Rafael smiled, a little embarrassed. I think it's because doing the right thing has become an exception. Augusto looked at him with genuine admiration. Then let us be the exception, Rafael. Throughout the day, the restaurant's phone didn't stop ringing. Customers called to praise the owner's attitude. Some asked for reservations just to see the place where it happened. But Augusto refused interviews. I don't want to make a spectacle of this, he said. The lesson isn't about me, it's about what we do when no one's watching. Meanwhile, Rafael waited on tables with a different smile. It was no longer the forced smile of someone afraid of losing their job. It was the sincere smile of someone who understands that respect cannot be asked for, is conquered. At the end of the night, when the movement died down, Pedro called Rafael aside. Mr. Augusto asked me to let you know that you're going to be promoted to customer service supervisor. Rafael's eyes widened in disbelief. What? Me? He said it's good to have someone in the room who knows the value of silence and dignity. Rafael was speechless. He felt a lump rise in his throat and just nodded, moved. That night, as he left the restaurant, he looked at the illuminated sign and whispered to himself, maybe life doesn't always pay well, but respect, that's the best salary there is. 2 days have passed since the incident in Dom Afonso restaurant, but the echo of that night still vibrated through the walls of the place. And now it spread through the streets, cell phones and screens of the entire city. It all started with a short 30-second video. Discreetly recorded by a customer sitting 2 tables away, it showed the exact moment when Augustus, the owner, said in a calm and firm voice, "True power is not in those who can command. It is in those who choose not to humiliate." That phrase spread like wildfire. Within a few hours, the video had surpassed 100,000 views. By the next morning, it was already on the pages of local portals and popular profiles. And when the sun went down, the name Dom Afonso became synonymous with something the whole world seemed to need to hear: respect. As the restaurant filled with new customers, many of them just curious to see the place of the lesson, Rafael tried to maintain the routine. But now, every person he met looked at him with empathy. Some whispered, "It's him." Others just smiled discreetly, as if admiring silent courage. In the kitchen, the hubbub was constant. Pedro, the manager, showed on his cell phone the messages he received from acquaintances. "Look at this, Rafael." A woman wrote here. "Show your waiter that he is an inspiration to many people." Rafael smiled, a little embarrassed. "I just did what anyone would do." Pedro looked at him firmly. "No, kid. Most people would have exploded or given up. You kept your cool, and that's something few people can do." Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Marcelo faced the other side of the repercussions. The arrogance of the previous night now spelled its own undoing. Someone recognized him in the video. In just a few clicks, your name and company were identified. Comments began to appear on the networks. "This is the businessman who humiliated the waiter. People like that should learn what real work is. Money buys a table, but it doesn't buy character." In less than a day, Marcelo Fontes went from influential client to symbol of wounded ego. Partner companies began to move away. An important contract has been suspended. And for the first time, he experienced something that money couldn't solve: the weight of collective contempt. At home, Marcelo watched the video on loop. He recoiled at every sentence, every look that exposed him. The face of Augustus, serene and firm, seemed to echo inside his head. He remembered every gesture, every word spoken in a tone of superiority. and felt his stomach churn. For the first time, not out of anger, but out of shame. Patricia, his wife, entered the room, holding her cell phone. It's everywhere, Marcelo. Newspapers, social media, even family groups. He ran his hands over his face. I know. And now? Now. I don't. No. She watched him for a moment, without saying anything. Then, in a low voice, he added, Maybe this is the first time that life has put you in the shoes of someone you've always ignored. The words cut deep. Marcelo remained silent, staring at the screen, where Augusto's sentence reappeared in white captions on a black background. It was as if the video had become a mirror, and the reflection he saw there, he barely recognized it. No Dom Afonso. Augusto followed everything from a distance. He refused interviews and avoided public appearances. For him, the message had already been delivered, and any attempt to profit from it would be to betray the very meaning of the gesture. But that afternoon, when he saw Rafael truly smiling for the first time, the boss understood that the impact had been greater than he had imagined. Clara, one of the oldest waitresses, commented, Mr. Augusto, I think the world needed to see this. He smiled, his tone serene. The world doesn't need heroes. Clara, it needs people who know how to be human. Meanwhile, on social media, a hashtag was spreading. Respect his luxury service photos of the restaurant circulated with phrases inspired by the video. People commented on leaders who treated their employees poorly. Others shared stories of those who were once humiliated and overcame it. Unintentionally, Augusto and Rafael had triggered something bigger, a collective conversation about empathy and power. That night, Rafael closed the salon and went out into the street alone. The early morning wind was cold, but light. He looked up at the sky and thought about how much a simple night had changed everything. Not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed that gesture. He smiled slightly and muttered to himself, Sometimes all it takes is a calm voice to silence the noise of the world. The echo of the wind carried his words, as if the universe agreed. And somewhere in the city, a man who once believed he ruled everyone was now beginning to learn to listen. The lights of the penthouse apartment of Marcelo Fontes were lit, but the atmosphere was silent. At the dinner table, the cell phone vibrated nonstop. Messages, notifications, missed calls. Some from colleagues, some from journalists, and several from people he'd never met, all saying the same thing in different words. Shame. I recognized you in the video. You destroyed your image. The screen illuminated his haggard face. The red eyes betrayed sleepless nights. The man who used to walk around in an impeccable suit now wore only a wrinkled t-shirt and the weight of his own choices. On TV, a presenter commented on the controversy. The businessman caught humiliating a waiter in a luxury restaurant continues to be the target of criticism on social media. Marcelo turned off the television in anger, but the silence that followed was even worse. The sound he was trying to silence was inside him. In the following days, life became a minefield. Old customers canceled contracts. Business partners avoided meetings. One of the partners sent a short and direct email. Marcelo, until things calm down, you'd better step away from the company. The phrase echoed in his head for hours. Moving away from the company. He, who had always boasted of being indispensable, was now the first to be discarded. As he left the office for the last time, he felt the gaze of the employees. Some pretended, others whispered, but everyone knew who he was. Not the successful businessman, but the man in the video. The arrogant customer. Outside, the cold afternoon wind hit him hard, and for the first time, he realized how small the world seemed when no one feared him. At home, Patricia, his wife, was waiting for him in the living room. He had deep dark circles under his eyes and an expression that was a mixture of tiredness and disappointment. How long are you going to pretend this will go away on its own, Marcelo? She asked, her voice firm. I'm not pretending. I don't know what to do, he replied, sitting down. Maybe start by admitting it was your mistake. He ran his hands over his face, taking a deep breath. I lost control, okay? It was a moment. Just a moment? She repeated, incredulous. No, Marcelo, this is who you've been for years. The difference is this time, the world saw it. That sentence hit him like an invisible punch. Patricia got up and walked to the window. I always warned you that respect is not a favor. And now, you're paying the price for not listening. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcelo just lowered his head, and for a few seconds, the sound of his own breathing was the only living thing in the room. That night he went out for a walk. He walked aimlessly, passing through streets he didn't remember knowing. The streetlights reflected in the puddles from the recent rain. People looked at him without recognizing him, or perhaps they pretended not to recognize him. As he passed in front of a simple snack bar, he saw something that made him stop. A young, tired but smiling waiter, serving a family with care. The customers thanked him and the boy responded with a sincere, "Good night." That image, so banal, seemed like a cruel mirror. Marcelo stood still for a few seconds. The lump in my throat returned. It was as if the universe was forcing him to watch what he had always ignored, the beauty of humility that he never had. In the following days, Marcelo began to isolate himself. He stopped answering phone calls, avoided meetings, and even uninstalled social media. That man, once proud to be heard, now ran away from the sound of his own voice. Until one silent morning, he found an envelope on the table. It was Patricia's. Inside, a short letter. I need some time. Not because of shame, but because I don't recognize you anymore. Find the man you were before power went to your head. When you do, maybe you will find peace too. Marcelo read the words several times, unable to hold back his tears. They weren't from anger, but from something deeper. Real repentance. The next morning, he looked in the mirror and saw the reflection of someone he no longer recognized. The tired look, the downcast expression, the heavy silence. And it was there, between the cold walls of his own house, that he understood something simple. He had lost everything, not from lack of money, but from too much ego. He sat down, took a deep breath, and whispered to himself, "He arrives." It was the first time he had uttered a word that sounded different. It wasn't an order. It was a request, a call for change. And for the first time, Marcelo Fontes felt that perhaps it was possible to start over. The rain was falling lightly when Marcelo Fontes parked the car in front of the Dom Afonso restaurant. It was early evening, and the golden lights reflected in the puddles on the asphalt, as if the place exuded the same serenity as before. But for him, every step toward that door felt like a plunge into the past. A past that, no matter how much he tried to forget, still hurt like an open wound. He took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and walked in. This time, there was no arrogance in the look, just regret. The same room, the same aroma of wine and fresh pasta, the same piano in the background. But everything seemed different, or maybe fewer different. The hostess recognized him immediately. There was a brief, awkward silence, followed by a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Fontes. How many people sit at a table?" "Just for one," he replied, his voice low. "But first, I'd like to speak with Mr. Augusto, if possible." She nodded and left. Marcelo stood looking at the tables. Some familiar faces recognized him, others just glanced at him. But the atmosphere was different. There was no hate in the looks. There was curiosity. The curiosity of someone who sees a man returning to the place where he fell. A few minutes later, Augusto Nogueira emerged. He wore the same simple elegance as always, his gaze calm but firm. He approached slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Good evening, Mr. Fontes," he said without irony. "What brings you back to my restaurant?" Marcelo took a deep breath. "The truth." "The truth?" Augusto repeated, slightly surprised. "Yes," the businessman replied. "I spent weeks trying to convince myself it was a misunderstanding, that I had been the victim of exaggeration. But the more I tried to justify myself, the more I realized it was my fault." Augusto watched him in silence. Marcelo continued, "I came here not to clear my name, nor to ask you to forget what I did. I came to apologize. To you, to the waiter, and to everyone who had to witness my arrogance." The sincerity in his voice broke the air. People nearby stopped talking, noticing the tone of the conversation. It was as if the entire room held its breath. Rafael, who was waiting on a nearby table, heard the conversation and stood still. He looked at the owner, then at Marcelo. For a moment he hesitated, but Augusto made a slight gesture, beckoning him with his eyes. The waiter approached, his heart racing. The two looked at each other. The last time they were face to face, the distance between them was one of power and humiliation. Now, all that separated them was silence. Marcelo was the first to speak. "I owe you an apology." Rafael kept his gaze steady. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Fontes." "Yes, I should," Marcelo replied. "Because that night I treated you as if your job defined your worth. And I learned the hard way that a man's worth doesn't depend on what he does, but on how he treats others." Rafael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of those words. For a moment, the entire room seemed frozen. The sound of the piano had stopped. Even the wind outside seemed to be waiting for the outcome. Augustus intervened, in a calm voice. "You can't imagine how rare it is to see someone come back to ask for forgiveness." Marcelo looked at him, moved. "Maybe because most people don't have the courage to face what they did. I myself had to lose everything to understand the value of a simple act." The owner nodded. "Sometimes life teaches you in a harsh way, but the important thing is that you learned." Marcelo gave a slight nod. "I lost contracts, friendships, respect, and I deserved it all. But if you and Rafael accept my apology, it will be more than I ever hoped to recover." Rafael extended his hand with a sincere smile. "Pardon accepted." "Sir." Marcelo held his hand tightly, his eyes welling up. "Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." The entire hall watched. There was no applause, just a silent thrill that filled the air. Augusto, with a slight smile, added, "You may sit down, Marcelo. Have dinner with us. I don't want to bother you. It will be less uncomfortable sitting down than carrying that weight alone." Marcelo sat down. The waiter brought a simple dish, homemade pasta, the same one he had served on the night of the scandal. But this time, the taste was different. Not because of the seasonings, but because humility seasoned the air. While eating, Marcelo observed the movement in the restaurant, and, for a moment, he understood. That place wasn't just a physical space. It was a symbol of something he had lost and finally found again. A true. The days that followed the reunion were of a different calm in Dom Afonso restaurant. The repercussion of the request for forgiveness, Marcelo spread rapidly. This time, there was no judgment, just respect. People commented on social media with phrases like, "Pride destroys, but humility rebuilds." Seeing someone apologize in public is rare. That is greatness. But inside the restaurant, away from the screens, the transformation was more profound. Augustus, Rafael, and even the other employees began to realize that this story would not end with forgiveness. She had planted a seed. On Monday morning, Augusto came in earlier than usual. He sat at the counter, watching. The staff move about calmly. Rafael cleaned the tables with the same care as always, but now there was something different about him, an air of assurance, of purpose. The boss smiled, beckoned him over and said, "You know, Rafael, this whole story made me think." "Think about what, sir?" asked the boy. "How respect changes the environment, how a simple gesture can transform the place where we work." Rafael stopped what he was doing and looked at him carefully. "You're right. That day taught me more than any training." Augusto stood up. "So, let's turn this into something bigger. I want to create a program here." "A program?" Rafael asked curiously. "Yes," replied the owner. "Let's call it Serve with Respect." The idea was simple, yet powerful. All new employees would go through training that would not just talk about service, but about empathy, dignity, and human behavior. Augusto wanted every person who wore the Dom Afonso uniform to carry more than just the logo on their chest, to carry the value of what that place represented. The project was presented to the team at the end of the day. Clara, one of the oldest waitresses, listened to everything with tears in her eyes. "Chef, that's beautiful," she said. because sometimes we serve expensive dishes to people who have never tasted humility. Augustus smiled. That's right. And now, every dish that comes out of this kitchen will have a new seasoning. Respect. Rafael, moved, added, We're not going to change the whole world, but whoever comes in here will leave different. That's enough, the boss replied. The world changes a little every time someone is treated with humanity. As the restaurant prepared to close that night, the door slowly opened. Era Marcelo. But this time, he didn't come to apologize. He was carrying something in his hands, a folder with papers. Mr. Augusto, may I come in? Of course, Marcelo, the owner replied calmly. You're always welcome here. The businessman placed the folder on the table. I saw that you started a new project. I wanted to, help. Augusto raised his eyebrows. Help how? I want to fund the program. Turn this idea into something bigger. Courses, lectures, videos. I want more places to learn what I've learned here. The hall fell silent. Rafael watched from afar, surprised. Augusto stood up, gave a slight smile, and shook his hand. So let's really get started, Marcelo. The following week, a small team formed. Old employees, new employees, and even former customers began attending the meetings. The serve with respect. Project turned into something that went beyond the restaurant. Within a few months, neighboring companies began adopting the same practice. Posters appeared with phrases inspired by the episode. Treating well is not a favor. It is character. Empathy is the spice that the world is missing. This time the press started talking about Marcelo again, but in a completely different way. The title of one of the articles said, Man who humiliated waiter creates respect at work project. And below, the phrase he himself said in one of the interviews, I learned that when we serve with humility, the world becomes our client. On a quiet night, Augusto observed the full hall. The waiters moved in harmony. The customers laughed. The sound of the piano echoed softly. Rafael walked past him and said, Did you notice? The restaurant looks different. Augustus smiled. No, Rafael. The restaurant is the same. We're the ones who changed. He looked at the illuminated sign outside. The light reflected off the windows, casting a golden glow over the tables. It was as if the name itself, Dom Afonso, had gained new meaning. A place where luxury was not in the food, but in the way people were treated. And in that moment, amidst the laughter and music, Augusto was certain that wasn't the end of the story. It was the new beginning. The sun was slowly setting over the city, tinting the windows of the Dom Afonso restaurant. Inside, the movement was calm. The soft sound of the piano mingled with the clatter of cutlery and the serene conversations. It was an ordinary night for the customers, but for Augustus, Rafael and Marcelo, it was more than that. It was the closing of a cycle. Sitting at the central table, Marcelo observed the room with eyes that no longer sought admiration, but learning. Rafael, now a supervisor, walked past the tables with a confident demeanor. He greeted the employees, corrected details, but always with kindness. It had become a silent example of what the project Serve with Respect represented. Augusto watched the scene with a calm heart. The restaurant he had built with so much effort now had a soul, and that soul was made of people transformed by empathy. That night's dinner had a special reason, the project's first anniversary. Discreet posters decorated the hall, and a small ceremony would be held at the end of the day. Augusto asked for silence and stood up, looking at all the employees gathered. A year ago, this restaurant was the scene of a disgrace, but today, it is a symbol of something much greater, redemption. Rafael smiled, moved. Marcelo, sitting discreetly in the back, listened attentively to every word, his eyes welling up. Augusto continued. What started as an apology became a wave of respect, and all of this only happened because we had the courage to look within and change. The hall erupted in applause, but between the applause and the smiles, there was an inner silence that said more than any speech. Peace had returned. After the ceremony, Rafael walked up to Marcelo. You know, Mr. Fontes, if someone had told me a year ago that we would be here side by side, I wouldn't have believed it. Marcelo laughed humbly. I wouldn't believe it either, Rafael. But life is funny. Sometimes it needs to break us to teach us how to be whole again. Rafael nodded thoughtfully. You've changed a lot. I have changed, Marcelo replied. And I want to keep changing. Because I realize that, in the end, success isn't about having the most expensive restaurant in town. It's about leaving it knowing you made someone feel valued. The two looked at each other, and the silence between them was no longer one of shame. It was one of understanding. A light silence of conquered peace. Outside, the rain began to fall. Marcelo got up and walked over to Augusto, who was watching the illuminated sign through the window. Thank you for listening to me that day. I didn't do much, the owner replied. I just said what needed to be said. The rest was yours. Marcelo smiled. And you taught me something that no amount of money can buy. Augusto looked at him curiously. And what would that be? The value of respect. Then learn to keep it, Augusto said, extending his hand. Because it is what pays the debts that pride leaves. They shook hands, and for a moment, the sound of the rain seemed lighter. Outside, the lights reflected in the puddles on the sidewalk, as if each drop told the same story, that of someone who once humiliated but learned to honor. When the restaurant closed, Rafael turned off the last lights. He looked around and smiled. That place wasn't just his work. It was the setting where he had rediscovered his own worth. And when he went out into the streets, he felt that the world outside was also a little different. Or maybe he was the one who had changed enough to see it. The rain stopped. The wind was fresh. And for a moment, everything seemed silent, calm, and fair. True wealth is not in how much you have, but in how much you respect. Pride builds walls, respect builds bridges. And sometimes the greatest victory in life is learning to serve with an open heart.